evening and welcome to our First Thursday's Arts Walk event with Inlandia Institute and Riverside Public Library. We're here to talk about writing about culture, and the panel discussion will begin in a few minutes. We're going to start with a short program where we invite some local writers, poets, authors of books, to come and read a little excerpt from their work. We limit it to 5 minutes. Well, for Carlos Cortez, he limits it to 3. And boy, is that a hard mark to hit. So we'll be watching that, and so about 5 minutes each. We have 4 readers. I want to say a few words about Inlandia. You may or may not know. Most of you do. Not everyone does. We're a literary and cultural arts nonprofit. We host workshops for writers. We have public events like this one. We have programs for children. We're sometimes in the schools. We're all over the place. And if you want to know even more, we've got these info cards. They're over on the side table, along with some water and some Milanos. We found those are a crowd pleaser in terms of cookies. We also have these bands. We got them. They say, "What's your story?" And we have those as handouts sometimes too, because everybody does have a story, and that's really what Inlandia is about. One of our panelists is Taria Smith, who is the editor of News from Native California, this incredibly beautiful publication, and she brought some additional complimentary copies as well. So there's some on that back table over there. We're very happy to have them. We have these for you to put in your pocket or your purse. They're free. They're blank. They're for you to write. Write notes. Write when you think of it. Write a grocery list. Write a thought. Write a poem. It's there for you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. The mic is on. You all can hear me pretty well, right? So readers, when you come up and read, this seems to be an okay distance. You could probably lean in a little if you want. And I'm going to sit down front here and get started. Our first reader is Dave Gambala. Dave, come on down. Or up.
That sound good there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Dave, and this is my 4th book, my 4th novel, Something Wicked Out There. And I'm going to read a scene from chapter 12. This is where my main character finds himself captured by the inhabitants of a strange and barbaric world. The fear of this fantastic land steered my mind, warning me to brace myself. I came to realize that fate had put me to this wicked test. Be careful what you wish for, was staring me in the face. Yeah, computer genius, step into the world of my choosing, all right. And so there I was, dragged by some nasty barbarians to some dingy prison, no doubt filled with crazy and corrupt lunatics that would not hesitate to assault or abuse me, or both. There was a darker side to this wicked mountain. I was going to have to challenge myself and push myself beyond as I never thought possible. The game of life, my life, had begun, and there was no telling what the outcome would bring, if anything at all. Once past the tall tower with the spiral stairway and past 2 towering columns that supported an archway, adjacent to the temple's grand entrance, I shot a glance back. In that moment, I caught sight of a dark-haired female in black. She was looking down. She appeared to be smiling. I could have sworn she was. Especially since you can't miss red lips on fair skin. Who was that woman? Did she belong to Margolius? And what was she doing there? Just then, I was hauled around by the guards who told me to keep moving and not look back. Nevertheless, I thought about that mysterious female, a complete contrast to the wretched warriors before me. She made me think about my situation and that maybe she could turn things around in my favor. The next thing I knew, I was taken down a stone pathway near the west corner of this complex. From the base of those steps, I was led to a solid oak door trimmed with metal studs. Beyond it was a chamber that would take us down deeper into the prison itself. I cringed. and trying to resist only made it worse. I tried, but I was overwhelmed by their brute strength. They forced me against the hard oak, and I crushed those jerks. I turned to defend myself, but they just grabbed and twisted my arms behind my back, gasping as my face was pressed against that door. One held me. The other one leaned in and said, "You got some guts, little man. I ought to crush you right here." He had a raspy voice. "Don't you worry now. You'll get your chance to let out that anger," he told me. "Now, if you want some practice, that too can be arranged." I said not a word as I held my breath from his terrible hygiene. "That's right," said another. "You better save it. Gonna need it. Gonna need that strength." Next, I was caught by surprise when someone stepped forth from the darkened hallway and threw a hood over my head. I managed to get a quick glance of that man, a stocky one at that. "Fresh meat, huh?" He had a very, very heavy voice. "They'll have fun with this fella." "The hell with you morons, get this off me," I angrily demanded. Bet he won't make it till morning," said one of the two henchmen. "He better, he's got a date with Drago," said the other. My cries were not only pitiful and useless, but muffled by the heavy hood that only made me nauseous. "Yell all you want, little man. Doesn't matter if you scream in here," said the one with the raspy voice. "Go on, scream," he pressed, laughing like a drunk with laryngitis. They were heartless beasts, like pirates, rowdy and waiting for a good brawl. Then he pushed me through the passage that would lead us to an underground corridor. This became apparent when we began descending the spiral staircase. About halfway down, this rancid odor filled the air. Even with the hood over my head, did I find myself gagging from the stench. It reeked all around, making me nauseous from the smell of a rotting something. Gasping for a breath, I stopped and I complained, "I need air." They laughed, and then one of them shoved me, making me stumble. "This lad thinks this is bad," said the one with the raspy voice. "Wait till he's caged in with the rest of them." Ha. That's it. Thank
you. Thank you, Dave. That was wonderful. We were riveted. Thank you so much. Our next reader is also one of our panelists for this evening, Dr. Carlos Cortez, who's going to share a poem with us tonight. Oops, that's my timer.
One poem sort of related to what we'll be talking about tonight. It's called Delicacy. The two crabby Canadian geese rode defiantly alongside Laurel, imprisoning her as they maneuvered her around Lake Evans to make certain that she didn't go near the little ones, protecting the less than 80 days from the more than 80 years, not knowing that we sometimes eat fowl. The ominous saltwater crocodile glared defiantly through the hopefully thick glass at the Singapore Zoo, inches from our faces, then opens its enormous jaws to display those ancient teeth before he swung his tail and thrashed away, not knowing that we had eaten salties for lunch. So, what should I say to our neighbor's poodle, not knowing that I had enjoyed a savory lunch in Seoul, South Korea, before I discovered what I had eaten?
Thank you, Carlos. I'm so glad you brought that tonight. Thank you. Our third reader is another poet, Rodrigo Diaz-Carrillo. It is poetry tonight, isn't it, Rodrigo?
Yes.
Yes, he will be right up to share.
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Diaz-Carrillo, and I will be reading in 2019 I self-published a book of, I called it poetry, bilingual, English and Spanish both. Today I'm going to read a poem. excuse me for a second, someone's calling me. That is not in the book, but that has to do with a little bit of my experience. I came to California when I was an adult, so my experience has been extraordinary. I believe I love this country much more than many people do. The poem that I will be reading has to do with that experience. I wrote it some time ago. It's called Black Sky. And it says like this. You left your shoes at the water's edge and crossed the ocean barefoot. I mean, truly barefoot. It was midnight when you sat and placed it on the other side. Without a moon, the stars shone bright. You stood up, and then with all your might, you swept your hand over the sky, and all the stars you sent to the other side. And then you rest, and you stood up. And then you slept, and time went by. And when you woke up, you sat at the water's edge in fright at the ocean's size. And when you looked up, you were suspicious of a black sky, which had no clouds, no moon, nor stars. And that's where I found myself. Thank you.
So beautiful and moving. It's lovely. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Very beautiful. Our final reader for tonight is Shirley Petro Tamura, who came prepared with her book that she wrote. Thank you, Shirley.
Good to be here. My book is historical literary fiction, and it is entitled Tanglewood. Tanglewood is the name of the plantation in which the story is set. It's also set on the Underground Railroad as well. And I'd like to introduce you to my main character. His name is Cassius, as a 5-year-old boy. When he was on the slave block one day, Cassius could not remember the words used to describe him. He only remembers trembling as he held his mother's hand. He could feel her shaking too. This was the moment when they could be separated. The crowd buyers blurred before his tear-filled eyes. Bidding started in earnest. Numbers rolled on. His young mind for the first time grasped that he was a body for sale. There existed a price for him, like what might pay for a chair, a saw, or a sack of grain. The reality of his blackness, his servitude, and his helpless humanity enveloped him in a wave of brown dust. That day, Henry Livingston purchased him and his parents. Together they rode a wagon to Tanglewood, where his new life began. So this book has been recommended by Catherine Howard Johnson and by the author Scott Skipper. And I'll read a description of what Scott has said about the book. He says, meet a rich cast with all manner of evil, inconstant, and duplicitous members of both races. Readers are brought along on the fugitives as they steal their way along the Underground Railroad, pursued by greedy bounty hunters. Deeply researched, Tanglewood sheds light on the intimate details of slave life and punctuates this opulent narrative with tender quotes from the period poetry of Walt Whitman. So there is poetry from Walt Whitman in this book as well, because I chose Walt Whitman because he was a contemporary of my characters. So it sort of enriches the book. And the book is available on Amazon Book Baby if you're interested in reading it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shirley, and thank you all for listening. It's a treat to be able to hear all kinds of writers, and these writers are homegrown. They are the people who live and work and write in Inlandia. You wouldn't know it to look at them because they were all terribly poised and comfortable, but it's nerve-wracking to get up and read your writing, isn't it? If you've ever done it even in a workshop or a class or among friends, you're putting a lot out there, and it's a big deal. So we appreciate all of you who get up to share your work with us. My friend and partner in crime, Katie Porter, has stepped out for a minute. She was going to do the introductions. She's not available right now, but we'd like to go ahead and get started with the panel. So she has some of the notes with the bios she was going to read and share. And I'm going to, as they say, wing it. So I'm going to get started with the panel, and if the panelists would like to, I'm going to call your name and then stand up and come on up. Our moderator for this evening is Minerva Canto, and I will read yours, Minerva. She is a longtime journalist whose work explores the places where politics, policies, and people converge. Based in Southern California, she frequently writes about social issues ranging from sentencing and juvenile justice to challenges faced by foster youth in accessing higher education. She's a native of Mexico City and speaks fluent Spanish. She's got a long resume. I'm not going to read it all right now. She currently serves as editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times, and I believe you just came from there to your work to get here tonight. So we're really happy to have you, Minerva. And we'll let you, if you wouldn't mind coming on up to the front. And then, as I said, Katie has most of the notes with her. So I'm going to ask the rest of the moderators to come on up. Dr. Carlos Cortez is with us tonight. Isha Lai, I believe, is here. Yes, there she is. Taria Smith is going to join us. James Coates is here as well, and Ellen Estela. Thank you all for being here tonight. You consider stand, whatever works for you.
And I actually work at home, so I only drove from Corona, not all the way from LA. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. For our panel, writing about culture, appropriate or appropriation. Alexander Chee wrote an essay about this topic in the culture section of New York Magazine in 2019. In this essay, which periodically makes the rounds in online literary communities, he asks, when it comes to writing the other, what questions are we not asking? The other referring to other cultures not our own. Often the question being asked by writers wanting to write about another culture is, why can't we write what we want? The short, simple answer is that people can write whatever they want, of course. The long, more complex answer takes into consideration other factors, including whether that writing is accurate and authentic, and whether that writing should be rewarded with a publishing contract. Tonight we'll hear from a distinguished panel of writers from a wide range of disciplines, genres, and expertise, who will share their thoughts on the first question, about writing with sensitivity and respect. They will offer strategies they have used, tips that can help you as a writer and reader. So I will go ahead and introduce the panel, beginning with Ellen, who is sitting here closest to me. Ellen Estela, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, please feel free to correct me. Ellen Estela has a forthcoming memoir, Exit Prohibited, about her life in Iran before and after the revolution. It's scheduled for publication by Inlandia Institute in late 2023. I got a quick glimpse at it, and it's a must-read. I can't wait to read it. She's a two-time Pushcart Prize nominee whose work has appeared in many publications, including Ink and Letters, Shark Reef, and the anthology New California Writing 2011. She's a former executive director of Riverside Arts Council and the Arts Council for San Bernardino County. She's also taught literature and writing at the University of Tehran, Cal State Bakersfield, and in the University of San Francisco's external degree programs. And sitting next to her is Yishan Lai. She has a novel, a YA historical novel, forthcoming in 2024 from Simon & Schuster. She is the author of 2 other books, a memoir called Pinups, published in 2020, and a novel titled Not a Self-Help Book, The Misadventures of Marty Wu, published in 2016. So she keeps very busy. She also teaches creative nonfiction at Bay Path University and is the author of 2 books. She writes the monthly Broadening the Bookshelves feature at The Writer magazine. And next to her, we have James Coates. James Coates is an author, poet, and spoken word artist. He completed his debut poetry book titled If I Had Lived in April 2018, and his second poetry book, All the Ways You Are Wonderful, was published in February 2020. He received his master's from CSU San Bernardino, and after graduate school began writing and performing his poetry. With a passion for all things creative, he strives to capture authentic self-expression through his work. He believes that poetry has the ability to bring diverse groups together. Thank you, James. And then next to him, we have Teria Smith. Teria? And she is a tribal member of the Torres Martinez Desert Coahuila Indians. For more than, did I mispronounce that?
It's Coahuila, like
Coahuila.
the Spanish double L.
Thank you very much, and I do apologize. For more than 6 years, she has been working as the director of the Berkeley Roundhouse, the California Indian Publishing Department at Heyday Books. She is the editor of News from Native California, a quarterly magazine devoted to the vibrant cultures, art, languages, histories, social justice movements, and stories of California's diverse Indian peoples. She is a graduate of the American Indian Journalism Institute and an alumna of the University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And finally, but not least, we have Carlos Cortez sitting at the very end of the table. And Dr. Cortez is the author of the memoir, Rose Hill, An Intermarriage Before Its Time. He also has an award-winning poetry collection titled Fourth Quarter, Reflections of a Cranky Old Man. Dr. Cortez is the Edward A. Dixon Emeritus Professor of History and currently co-director of the School of Medicine Health Equity, Social Justice, and Anti-Racism Initiative at the University of California, Riverside. He has served as scholar in residence with Univision Communications and was the creative cultural advisor for Nickelodeon's Dora the Explorer and Go Diego Go. And that completes our panel lineup. We'll get started on our panel. The first question for the panelists is, if you could please briefly, and we'll just go down the line to begin with, if you could please briefly describe your work in relation to writing about culture, whether it be your own or another one that's not your own. Ellen?
Sure. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I write about Iran, whether it's creative nonfiction or sometimes poetry. I often find myself writing about Iran. That was such a profound experience for me to have lived there for 8 years, beginning in 1971. And then to be part of this culture, even in exile, for 52 years. So I've been a citizen of Iran for 52 years, but I've only lived there for 8 years. In the book that Minerva mentioned, Exit Prohibited, I'm writing about the experience of being a foreigner in Iran, of learning that culture, of really, learning to be an adult in another country, in another language, with a squiggly alphabet. All of this is set against this political upheaval that was happening at the time in Iran. So you're getting my personal experience of learning to be Iranian, learning to to be part of that culture. And also then trying to navigate this very strange thing that's happening. And some of it just went totally over my head. And I think even my husband and I were surprised at what happened to the country in 1979. We were really caught unawares of it. So it's an attempt to go back and look at where we were in our bubble, where we failed to see certain things. And so I guess I'm writing about Iran to make sense of that whole experience. I mean, I think that's why memoirists write. I hope that's why they write. That's, there has to be some sort of analysis, not just the facts, but what it all means and how you got there, how it happened. And so that's one reason for writing this book. Another is to show a largely American audience a picture of Iran that they don't see in the popular media, that they don't see on the nightly news or in movies and TV. So I'm hoping that is going to be surprising to some people. I think they need to be surprised.
Yes, I think it's important to see beyond what we see on the news, especially the images that we're seeing right now. There's obviously a lot more than to that world than we're seeing in these images. Yishan?
Thank you, Minerva. Everybody, thank you so much for having us. It's such a pleasure to be here. Every month I write a column for The Writer magazine, which is a nationwide publication for writers, called Broadening Bookshelves. And the whole point of it is to increase our awareness of literatures that may be outside of the canon, right? I have my college copy of the Norton Anthology. I'm 48 years old now. It is 1,000 pages. There's one writer of color in it, Derek Walcott, and he did not identify as being a black writer. Okay, so it was one of those things that I just felt I needed to tackle. My editor is great. I've been writing for about a year now, and it's been wonderful to discover these different demographics that have their own literatures that I didn't know about. So it's my job to introduce those literatures to people who also may not have that benefit. So I'm East Asian. I think until like 2013 or so, I thought I could be white. I grew up here in Claremont. And for a long time, I thought it would be okay for me to try and pass, right? Not realizing that maybe I'm wearing this face and that's not possible. So around 2013, I started to really lean into my East Asian identity. What it's like to be what we call 1.5 generation immigrant. That is to say, somebody who's not born here, but somebody who's very much American, right? My mom called me a banana the other day. You can guess what that means. So in my fiction and in my creative nonfiction work, I've been leaning a lot more into exploring that East Asian identity and what it means to have grown up here but still carry around this face.
James?
Hi, so I'm James Coates. I run a workshop, a monthly workshop called Be the Change, which tackles social justice topics. This was started about the middle of 2020, while at the same time working on this collection, Midnight and Mad Dreams, which is like an exploration of the intersectionality of oppression. And so really I write about the human experience, but that comes through the lens I identify with as an Afro-Latinx individual. So social justice is kind of a huge part of my poetry that I write in. There's many different kind of topics within that to discuss. A lot of different systems at play, and so I often find myself writing the stories that I feel like aren't being told, trying to capture people's stories that maybe don't have the ability or the desire to put it down. And that's kind of the basis.
Thank you, James. Terry?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Inlandia, for having me here. My name is Taria Smith, and I am a tribal member from the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla, which is east of here, and I used to in the far far east end of the Coachella Valley. I am the editor of News from Northern California magazine, and the magazine has been around for 35 years. And out of those 35 years, I've been there 7, and I'm also the first California native person to edit the magazine, which is saying something. So I frame a lot of my work around visibility, and it's a consistent daily task to educate people about a severely, severely marginalized group of people in our own home. And being California native myself, it's a very frustrating and painful experience every day to come face to face with the fact that people don't see us in our own home. But it's also very invigorating and exciting every day to be able to share the beauty of the tribal cultures across the state. I'm really excited this evening to be able to share this topic with so many folks that have so many different perspectives. But I'm also really excited to be able to talk about some of the adventures and misadventures that I've had in the appropriation space, which unfortunately overlaps all too often and very clumsily. So thank you so much for having me here. Looking forward to this evening.
Like Turi, I'm excited about listening. I'm here to listen as much as anything else because the kinds of perspectives we're likely to have. And I come at this from someone who's in the 28th year of his anti-career, which is everything I've done since I retired from the University of California in 1994. So I had a 26-year university career. Now I've had a 28-year anti-career to follow up. And what I've been doing as a diversity consultant, lecturer, and so what I do is everything from media consulting, you mentioned Dora the Explorer and Go Diego Go, looking at all the scripts and talking about and cautioning or helping Nickelodeon come out with the kinds of episodes it does, to writing now for a column for the easing American Diversity Report, is a monthly easing, and I write a monthly column called Diversity in Speech, which goes directly to the kinds of issues we're talking about today. It's sort of a preliminary to a book I hope to finish in the next few months called Speech versus Diversity, Diversity versus Speech, looking at the 50-year clash of these two ideas. Finally, working with, as a member of the National Content Moderation Advisory Board for the website, Teachers Pay Teachers. For those who don't know, it's the world's most popular website in which teachers upload lesson plans and other teachers buy them and take them down and use them. It has a couple million submissions that come in. They have 180,000 teachers who are uploading stuff. And then the question we have to face is, how do we create community rules which, in a simplistic way, keeps out the bad stuff, but in the process doesn't accidentally keep out the good stuff? And it's a hellish job. And we meet probably once a month, some knockdown, drag-out discussions within the board over how do you address this conundrum, the kinds of things that the various other panels have talked about. Because cultural appropriation is just embedded in this whole process that we're in. So I come at this from a number of different angles, and I'm really looking forward to listening to folks tonight.
Thank you so much, and I really love how diverse this panel is, and I want to say again how sorry I am that I missed my mispronunciation tonight, and I unwittingly illustrated the point that we don't know enough about our native peoples, and we should know more. I should know more. So moving on to the first question. What do you panelists think? Is it okay to write about a culture that is not your own? Have you considered doing this in your own writing, or do you think it's best to write what you know to be able to write authentically? Ellen?
Oh, okay. Well, I certainly hope it's okay to write about other cultures, because that's what I'm doing all the time. And I think I'm writing about what I know, because I told you 8 years living there, 52 years being a citizen of Iran, and loving the culture and having, adopted it as my second culture, and also being adopted by Iran. I really felt welcome there. I really felt part of it. When I went to Iran, I wasn't just passing through. I was all in. Had my children there, got my master's degree there, worked there, several jobs, universities, museums. So I felt like I was part of the culture. I was part of things. And I think that we would still be there had it not been for Ayatollah Khomeini. Threw a little bit of a wrench in the works. We probably would be going back and forth by this time, 6 months here, 6 months there. So I just think that, let's see, writing about another culture is kind of it's just writing about my life. And I'm trying to be honest about it. I'm trying to see things from another perspective as well, not just how I reacted to Iran, but the people that I met, what were their motivations, what were the driving force behind their actions, and it's a way for me to keep that culture close, because it was in a sense taken away, by the revolution. We had to leave, so it's a way to keep it close to me and to protect my investment in all those years in Iran.
Thank you, Ellen. Yishan?
I'm going to throw the question back at you. At which point does a culture become your own? I left Taiwan when I was 4. I still have a family there. You were in Iran for 8 years of your adult life, right? So your awareness of it is going to be really different from a close friend of mine who was born in Iran and then had to flee because of the new regime, right? And her perspective is very different from another close friend of mine who is Kurdish, okay, and who only left Iran 8 years ago, right? So there are these entry and exit points into culture that I think it's really hard to navigate if you're not actually in it, right? But I think that question of when a culture becomes your own is something we really have to work on, right? I mean, I am the worst person to ask about modern day Taiwan, because when I go there, my family takes me to many, many, many restaurants. I have been to one national park in Taiwan. I left in 1978, and we only left military rule. We came out from under military rule in 1989. Okay, so all of these things that my colleagues are experiencing or my family is experiencing, I don't get to experience. Right? Am I the best person to write about being Taiwanese? I don't know. But I can write about being Taiwanese here in America, right? So in a way, some may say, well, how can you write about being a white American? Well, quite frankly, I've seen everything there is to know about white Americans. Right? I know what happens when white women get their periods, because I see it on commercials. I know what happens when you have irritable bowel syndrome, because I see it on commercials. I know what happens when you shop for insurance, right? I know what happens when you eat Cheerios in the morning, okay? So these little bits of American life, of what American life, as I mentioned before, I live them, and I try to live them, right? So it's okay for me to write about that, right? Is it okay for a white American who's lived in Taiwan for 25 years to write about Taiwanese culture? Probably, but it's best for him to write about it from his perspective. As a white American, living in Taipei, where nobody else looks like him, teaching an ESL class, right? Okay, it's probably not okay for him to write about being an Aboriginal Taiwanese person living in the mountains, right? So it's tricky, right? But these are hard questions that we have to ask ourselves. We have to ask ourselves if it's the right time. We have to ask ourselves if we've earned it, and we have to ask ourselves whether or not it's appropriate.
That was really good. So yeah, I think that's what makes this particular discussion challenging is that
Right, though, right? I mean, so
yeah, yeah. So because if it was something like intellectual property, right? Like you can clearly identify this belongs to me. I wrote it. I made this music. But with culture, it's constantly fluid and growing and being influencing other cultures and developing and adapting. And so so it is challenging to kind of identify, what includes culture. Is it food? Is it dress? Is it ideas? Is it religion? And all of those things can be part of a culture. And so it's hard to say, like, well, what can we do or say about a culture that isn't our own? But to me, the biggest question is the why. Why do I want to write about this culture that isn't my own culture? And so what plays inside me is reaching for that connection. And am I doing it because I'm inspired by the culture? Am I doing it because I want to connect with the culture? Or is there another reason? Like, I think, I need a good guy for my story, so I'm going to pick someone from that culture. I need a bad guy for my story, I'm going to pick someone from that culture. And so I think all that kind of plays in part like the intention of writing about a culture. Now, just because you have good intention doesn't mean that it can't still be harmful. And that's where the making sure you do a good job, like you do your research. I'm sure we'll get into that later, but I think about in my book, I have a poem about the Asian American hate that was going on in this country during the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm not from that culture. And so, I had asked myself, why did I want to write about this thing? Because it was really bothering me, seeing everything happening, seeing friends experiencing this hate. And so I wrote a poem about it. But I just didn't write it and set it off. I wrote it and then I went to friends and can you take a look at this for me? Am I missing something here that you would see because you're from that culture that I don't get? And there were some tweaks and modifications to really make the poem strong that were suggested. And I think that's just being respectful.
So I think something that we're noticing here as these writers are talking about their process is that they're asking themselves a series of questions. It's not just themselves like throwing themselves into the writing process, but before they do that, they do some sort of self-examination. Teria, what about you?
Okay, from the other end, as an editor, we get a lot of people that come to us for the magazine, non-tribal people that aren't affiliated with any nation in California, tribal nation in California. And so that, to me, isn't where the problem is. The problem comes when the approach is anthropological and antiquated and participates in erasure. I can give an example and a half. There's and it happens quite often, but I have an example and a half that are pretty poignant. There was a gentleman, for example, a couple of years back who submitted a story. He was a non-native person, submitted a story about Pablo Toc, who he was a historical figure of Liseño descent, who wrote in Liseño language about his experience at the mission San Luis Rey down in what's now known as San Diego County. And so the gentleman, I read his, I completely read his submission, and it was painfully clear that he didn't talk to any California Indian people or any Lasania people at all. So I gave him back notes and I said, it would be important for you to talk to somebody, because he talked about how important Pablo talk was in Lasania language preservation. I said, have you talked to anybody that's a language teacher, a language, a linguist from that group of tribal people? I said, it's very important that you do that. And he proceeded to tell me that he was a full-time teacher and didn't have the time to talk to any Lasania. And so I said, okay, you can't publish in this magazine unless you talk to some Lasania people. And there was another gentleman who wrote about it was a practice of rawhide, deer, different, rabbit, that sort of thing like that. And nothing about California tribal people specific. What did these folks do? What did these other folks do? And gave him notes again. Said here. You can insert some stuff about some California tribal people. The name of this magazine is News from Native California. So it would be great if you did that. And he pushed back exceptionally hard and was just like, and I'm of the school of thinking if you're from Riverside and if you're not familiar with a gentleman by the name of Rupert Costo, read up on him. He talked about how Pan-Indianism is a big threat to our tribal cultures in California. And so that informs my work, and I push back against Pan-Indianism as far as I can. And so he was very upset, and why don't you, and everything. And I finally said to him, I said, why don't you want to include anything about California Indian people? Why don't you want to do it? And so it's an antiquated thought. I mean, it's an antiquated practice that anthropology developed. We know better about Native people. We know all about you, and we don't have to have any involvement on by anybody from your group to tell you who you are. That's not acceptable to me. I mean, if you want to go to another publishing company, if you want to go to another magazine, you're free to do that, but you're not going to do it here. And so that's how I feel about that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, Terry, you said some really interesting things here, and the first thing I wanted to know is, does everybody here know what Pan-Indianism is? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so if everybody knows that, that's fine. But there's any question about it? Sorry.
Okay, it's pretty complicated, but Pan-Indianism kind of developed in the 1970s during the American Indian movement. It's an inside-outside thing. So folks that were part of the American Indian movement to kind of develop visibility for tribal people, and they kind of, how do you say it, sort of omni-racialize themselves, into one visible type of culture, if you will. So, and it's oddly enough the culture that was admired mostly by I would say dominant society, dominant culture. So if you think about tribal people, majority of people think about plains culture. And there's a reason for that. That they were the ones that mastered horsemanship, and they had warring tribes and everything like that. So they were admired a lot by a lot of the settlers that encountered them because they were these fierce type of people. So when you think about tribal people, you think about things that are associated a lot of times with plains culture. So that concept, in a very, very concise, I could go on and on and on, but that's Pan-Indianism. It's kind of looking at an entire group of people through one cultural group. And really, my tribal, where I come from, for example, if you look at plains culture, they play with drums, and I've had to explain this to people, we don't do that here. I've had to, we play with gourd rattles and things like that, but it's very, very difficult for an individual who doesn't have any exposure to any kind of tribal culture other than what's visible in Pan-Indianism, to understand that a lot of tribal people don't do the same sorts of things. That helped.
The second question, if it's okay, we can talk, was what tipped you off to the fact that the first person had not consulted any Lusano Indians at all?
Oh gosh, that was pretty evident. They're one of our neighboring tribes. We do a lot of things. I got family members who were from Lusano bands and everything like that, and it was really written. It was really written like, how do I say it? Like with this certainty and declaration of who's important to us, without asking us who's important. If you ask me, for example, who's important to who's an important person in a Lusano language, I'm going to come up with a bunch of different contemporary people who are powerful speakers and everything like that. And part of that, how do I say it? Like, it's that whole idea of relegating tribal people to the past. All the important people that had anything to do with tribal people are way in the past and gone. So that kind of stuff like that. And there was no reference to anybody contemporary. Those were the kind of things that were tipping me off about that.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you for asking.
This discussion, Jerry, that you've been having, I want to build on. So, two different angles on that. Now, I agree with the stance you took. Now let's go to teachers pay teachers. And our challenge is, how do we try to make certain that lesson plans that are uploaded don't give that kind of impression of Indians are all alike or they're all Plains Indian, yet recognizing that a lesson plan might have one image on there. So you can't expect a second grade lesson plan to have all the varieties. So we're dealing with the challenge is that we don't want to stop people, including non-native people, from uploading stuff, lesson plans. And by the way, we don't know the backgrounds of the people who upload them. But at the same time, we don't want materials that carry out that suggestion you just talked about, that they're all basically alike sort of thing. So that's the one. The other angle is we get to Dora the Explorer. Okay, so here's the dilemma. In my first meeting of the Dora the Explorer consulting group, there were about a dozen of us, all Latinos on that. The argument that broke out was, should Dora be Puerto Rican? Should she be Chicano? Should she be Dominican? Should she be Cuban? Blah, 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 blah. Somebody even suggested she be Argentine. Can you imagine 12 Latinos arguing that? So I came up and I said, why don't we make her, hold on, a pan-Latino? Because she's only one character. She's only one character. The argument against it is that she can't be. If you do that, then she can't be authentically anything. My counter argument is that let the viewer, little kids who view her, inscribe themselves on this one little girl. Don't ask her to be everything. Be one thing, but don't isolate her so that only Puerto Ricans identify with her or Mexicans identify with all that. And I was the only person in the room. All the other people in the room, the consultants, came down to me. They stopped fighting among the ethnic battle about let's make Dora Puerto Rican, no, let's make her Chicano. Stop and let's get Cortez. But the vice president and the producers of the show later sat down and talked about it and said, we're going to go with Cortez's idea. And that's why Dora is never identified on screen as a particular group. And guess what happened? We got letters and interviews from Bolivian kids, from Cuban kids, from Chilean kids, all can identify she's one of us. So in this case, I make no apologies for making her Palomino, which is a very different situation than what you're talking about. But it shows, I think, the dilemma we face would say, to go back to Yishun's comment, when does the culture become your own? My sense, what is the culture that becomes your own? And that by necessity, we all cross cultural lines because none of us can be all of anything. And so this is an ongoing dilemma which the different books are wrestling with in different ways. And it's not a resolvable dilemma. So it just hangs out there. Thank you. And that's why you can't set rules, on rigid guidelines on what it means to. When does appropriation stop? When does it not stop? I don't know.
And we'll go back to the issue of questions. This is why it's important to do your research, obviously, and ask yourself some questions to help you along on that research. In that vein, I would like to ask our writers today to talk a little bit about how they make sure that they are writing with sensitivity when they're writing about other cultures, to share tips and strategies, what kind of research, who are the people that you call on, where do you find these people? Hopefully they're people that are already in your friend group if you're wanting to write about this culture. But if you could talk about some of that concrete tips that we can offer to the writers here. Ellen?
Sure. Yes. Well, writing is a kind of conversation with your intended reader, maybe, and maybe it's a conversation with yourself too. You have to keep constantly quizzing yourself. Like, did I get this right? Am I being too hard on this person in this situation? Because I'm writing about real people. I'm writing creative nonfiction. And you have to constantly be aware of your own limitations as a person who's writing about another culture, no matter how well you think you know it. So it's been incredibly helpful to me to have other readers. Ali, my husband, is always my first reader. He was there when all this was happening. I've given it to other friends. Other friends have read chapters of it. They're Iranian friends. And I do have a very helpful friend who's a scientist and also a writer, an Iranian. And he has checked the book he's kind of the technical editor. He makes sure that my transliterations are consistent, that my historical references are clear, all kinds of things that kind of help ground the book. But that's one of the things that I do.
Okay. Well, what about you, Yushan?
I don't have tips. I have guardrails. When you were bowling as a kid and you had those like inflatable bumpers, like that's my framework, right? These are the things that I kind of look for, and I pretty much always start with James's question: why? Why am I doing this? What is the point of my inserting or wanting to engage with the character, particularly now in my fiction, right? There was a conversation pretty late in the draft of the forthcoming adult novel where one of my readers wanted to know, at my agents, right, wanted to know why I didn't write more queer characters into the story. And the answer was really easy, right? Like this wasn't that story. My particular character, it's a historical novel that takes place in the Antarctic, on a ship, right, that goes exploring. A, it's not that story, and B, my character is not the kind who would see a queer relationship back in the 1910s and not make us think about it, right? And so I didn't want to go there, right? But also I'm not a queer personality, right? Now, with that said, there is a trans person who I follow on Twitter, and she was very clear about her guidelines. She said that she didn't care who wrote about the queer lifestyle and or identity, right? Or why they were writing about it, right? Really, it's about that person's individual motivation. Insofar as it's not for her to out anybody who is queer, right, or anybody out anybody who's queer, it also isn't her job to out somebody's motivation for the queer identity, okay? But then the onus rests on the shoulders of the writer. Again, asking that vital question of why you're doing it. But then, when you've decided to do it because you've decided you're doing it for the right reasons for you, making sure that you're pursuing that point of view from a perspective of respectful curiosity, right? Those are pretty subjective terms. What does respectful curiosity mean? For every single one of us here in this room, it's going to mean something different, right? But you have to examine that, and you have to figure out whether or not that's right for you. And then the good news is you probably have an editor who will be like, no, this is a bad idea, right? But just the right idea to her, right? This is a terrible idea, right? So, yeah, I mean, we have these guardrails, right? And I just think of them as my bumpers, but they almost always exist outside of my writing process, in the body of somebody else, and in the body of somebody who knows better than I do.
Halloween just passed. You know, that it can be a particular time of events when people wear costumes of other cultures, and it's obvious, it's blatant, it stands out as being in poor taste. Like you recognize blackface when you see it, but I think about like how do the same kind of ideas perpetuate in literature, and you know the characters that are created in literature. And so if we choose to have a black character talk a specific way, how familiar are we with the actual language? Whether it's colonial times, whether it's modern day New York or Los Angeles or Oakland. That's part of the challenge of researching and understanding. I was invited recently to submit to a queer publication because I attend this queer open mic. And I was like, I'm not queer. I really think that spot should go to someone within the community. And the person that runs the mic and was putting this together was like, you come to the mic, you share in community with us. Send me something you have that you feel like might be appropriate for the magazine, and then I'll choose and decide whether it fits in that. And so I did, but my first thought was, how can I be most respectful to this community? And sometimes, stories aren't hard to tell. I had wrote a story and I wrote a poem, and I thought it was good, but then I was like, and it was truthful, it was an individual's experience. But I felt like it's not my story to tell their experience. And so I showed. So just constantly being mindful of being respectful of other cultures and being empathetic. And I'll give you an example, the Dora thing. So I wrote this poem, like an old appreciation poem to Black women. They loved it. Did it over mics, wonderful. Everybody's happy. And I was like, you know what? I need to write one for Latino women. It did not go well at all. So I wrote it, and I was like, okay, I'm putting together what type of things do I appreciate? So I'm looking internally, oh, my mom loves to dance. We'll put dance in there. Oh, my grandma loves to cook authentic, Latino food. I'll put that in there. And then people were like, this feels like you're picking, stereotypes out. And what didn't work with the Black cultural experience in America, although Blackness isn't a monolith, there are shared experiences. know what blue magic is, you know what, hair through a hot comb smells like. But with Latino culture, Latinx culture, it's so diverse, right? As was mentioned, Puerto Rican, Cuban, and Venezuelan, Guatemalan, and so the poem was trying to encompass this huge group of diverse individuals under the umbrella of Latinx, and it was so difficult to do. And so, I got the feedback. This is a workshop. They're like, you got to go back to the drawing board and figure out something else. And so then I had to go into my personal experience and talk about my mother's culture and the food and how they cook and and what dances they do, right? Because it's different the dance that she does than Argentinians do, and so the poem had to be redeveloped. But because of going to a workshop and having others give you feedback, which I feel like is the most helpful thing to do if you're not sure about it. I was able to not take it out to open mic and get booed for.
But I also think you're talking about specificity, right? I mean, every one of these cultures has like these individual traditions and individual aspects of them. You got to dial into what that is. So if you ever find yourself painting with a broad brush, you need to ask yourself why you're doing that, right? And whether or not that even works. Because odds are it's not going to work.
No pen poems.
Well, I was educated and trained as a journalist and everything like that. And so one of the things that we say is, or something that's typical of the journalist mantra is like, I know a little bit about a lot of things. And so when something comes to me that's not from my culture, with Heyday and with News Command California specifically, we have like an editorial board of people whose specific task it is to wait there for us to go to if we have questions about something that we don't know about. So I'll if there's something that kind of seems like I don't know about this, I'll reach out to someone else from that culture. Not one person is an authority on everything, even from their own tribe, because people's families have different stories and practices and things like that. They know a whole lot better than I would. So that's helpful. I always lean on wanting to talk to people from that group. I mean, that's just what I do, because I don't. It would be with the responsibility of being the only publication dedicated to California tribes. It's a huge responsibility. So I don't want to mess anything up. And that's unavoidable sometimes. We're going to mess up. But I would rather have made the effort to talk to somebody from that cultural group who I know of that would be able to help guide me along the right way.
Well, this is so fascinating that as you're talking, I'm thinking about what Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, novelist, once wrote. 12 words that I use as my guide. I think 12 of the greatest words written in the English language. It goes like this: ever tried, ever failed. No matter, try again, fail again. Fail better. And James, as you were talking, that's what you're doing. But when you're doing crossing cultural lines, there's something else that happens, which as you cross cultural lines and fail better, and you will. I mean, if you cross a line, you will screw up, or someone will call you out on it. You reflect back on yourself, and that's what you, James, and I so admire what you did. You reflect back on your own personal upbringing, experiences, etc. And Ellen has talked about this, and that's what's good. So, I'm going to share with you something. It's a little different, but I'd love to get a response. There was a young lady named Lily Jackson who got her MA at UCR, playwright. She had seen me doing my one-person play. I do a one-person play called Conversation with Alana, one voice multicultural rite of passage, in which I carry on a 60-minute conversation with my daughter about our family's past. So she'd seen that, And she got a hold of me and said, Carlos, I'm producing, it's just a reading of my play in LA. Would you come in? I've got a group of professional actors. I'm not professional, but you would make, I've got some parts of you, I think you'd make a perfect racist. You know, I took it as a compliment. You would make a great racist. And so I got to play 4 racist roles in a cast that otherwise was all African American professional actors. So I went in. So that's how I celebrated my 85th birthday. Was actually making my LA theatrical debut. So I got the script, and the N-word is used constantly. This is an African American play. The N-word is used constantly throughout the play. Now my wife says to me, "You're not going to use it, are you?" And I said, "Well, I haven't read the whole script yet." Fortunately, as I went through it, I never, even though I'm a racist, I was never called upon to say it. The closest I came was a line when I said, "These men, African American," they call themselves African Americans. It was in the script, written by an African American playwright. So I went in and did it. And then I wrote for the e-zine I write for. I said, well, that would make a good column. My experience of having to deal with this. And then I love the Yisha meant about guardrails. I think one of the key things you have to do when you want to cross cultures and write is to impose your own guardrails and say, I'm not omniscient. I don't have it all. I'm not going to be so arrogant as to say, I'm going to listen to others, which in your case, they didn't listen to you. But, so I said, Lily will be my guardrail. And so after I wrote my column about the N-word, and I talked about a lot of other things, I said it to her and said, Lily, will you now react to me? And she didn't. She chopped me up at a couple of things I said. And I went back and failed better and ultimately published the column. But I think to cross cultures, you need to have the humility to say, I'm going to create guardrails because I can't do it all. And if I don't listen to others, I'm doing that. Not that they're going to make it perfect, but they're going to provide some checks and balances that will cause me to reinspect my positionality in this whole thing. So I think these ideas are coming up with are fabulous ideas. I'm taking notes here like mad. For a column, I'm going to write for the American Diversity Report about this conversation.
I think one thing that really emerges from all this is I think it was Yishan who said respectful curiosity. And I think that that's something that we journalists do try to employ, especially as a journalist in Southern California with so many different cultures, and we're just not going to know about all the cultures, but we can employ that respectful curiosity, being able to do the work. And the writers today have shared with us some of the questions that they ask of themselves as they're writing about other cultures, some really terrific questions. And importantly, what are the guardrails? What are the guardrails that you'll be employing in your work when you're writing about other cultures? We have just a few minutes left for questions. Are there any questions? Okay, any closing thoughts from the writers on tonight's topic? Perhaps on how do you make sure that you do not include harmful stereotypes? Maybe before the audience tells you?
I'll say something. You just threw me off on my book that I'm writing that I almost finished. I gotta go back and check everything.
So yeah, like having diversity reads of your material, throughout the writing process will help, so that you don't have to go back to Dan and change things up. I think one of the huge things when we think about this appropriation is that we didn't get a chance to talk with this the idea of profiting from the other person's culture and making sure that we're not, profiting off the pain or vacationing in the trauma that these cultures have experienced. And so, again, that comes back to being respectful and educating ourselves, right? Because if we know what the stereotype is. If you say, what's a stereotype about black parents raising their children, or what's a stereotype about Jewish people with money, or what's a stereotype about Asian store owners. And so there are certain stereotypes that pops to mind really quickly, and then there's others that are subtle that we don't even realize that we're viewing them as stereotypes. And so that's where asking yourself, asking people from that culture, and doing works that you don't continue down that path. And then when you do, you will get called out. So don't. And a lot of times when we get called out, we like to be like, well, this is why, and explain it. But accept the criticism and go back and do the reevaluation, because it will just lead to improving your writing and connecting with the audience you intend to.
I'm so glad that you brought that up about profiting and everything. That's the one thing I don't think that we were able to talk about. Because my mom's always saying this thing when we're talking about people on reservations, why do Native people think everybody's stealing all the time? It's because we've had everything stolen from us. Everything. So when you talk about people profiting or people, that's a key. It's something that I always feel I'm always on the defense on. Is somebody trying to capitalize on our pain and and everything like that, and it's a hard thing to try to wrangle in, because it always seems like there's these ideas, like the stereotyping that you talked about, with us it's always oh, we're so sad, we're so tragic, we're just beaten up, and nobody wants to feel like that. But there is some truth to us feeling like we're always getting, somebody's always trying to steal something from us. And that's where when I think about appropriation, I think about it's taking and not giving something back, or not, contributing to the culture that you're taking from. And so, when you said that, it really, really resonated with me very heavily, that you're not profiting off of somebody else's historical trauma, which is something that I feel like I come up against quite a bit. And I really appreciated about the guardrails too, because I feel like, something that not everybody knows about me is, I'm very Korean and everything like that, but the other part of my life is, my husband is from Cuba, and I've been in Cuba 11 times, and I love it. It's a beautiful culture filled with wonderful people, and people are like, why don't you write about it? It's because it's not mine to share about, I feel like, and I think, do people really want to read about that? And I'm afraid I'll get things wrong, but I feel like I've had a beautiful experience there, but is it mine to share? Probably not, and I'm fearful. I'm fearful about sharing those types of things.
So it's okay. I want to revolve that, real quickly, because you can write your story of what it's like to be a Native American person, right? I read it. Yeah.
Oh, I want to read it. Somebody said on my own.
We would read it, right? But I think there's this real sense of I just talked to an illusion writer this morning for my column. And she said that she's always fearful of appropriating the illusion culture. And I said, but, okay, I'm seriously confused, right? And she said, the problem is that when I was younger, her great-grandfather had been through the Carlisle Indian School, which is the school that attempted to strip all Indianness from Native Americans, right? And she said that where she grew up in central Pennsylvania, She still has a 717 area code on her phone after all these years, right? But she said that where she grew up in Somerville, Pennsylvania, where Carlisle was based, it was seen as a benefit, right? This poor orphan child got to go through Carlisle, right? So on and so forth. So she grew up in this whitewashed atmosphere of being Aleutian and yet being white, right? And she's white passing, yeah? So she's very keen on to this idea of appropriating her own culture, right? And that is a possible thing, right? But I also want to call out what James said a second ago, this idea of being called out. The third question on our list here, which we didn't get to, is what advice how do you avoid including harmful stereotypes in your own work, right? I didn't. Like, that first novel, not a self-help book, there's a very cursory examination of the Aboriginal Taiwanese, okay? I really screwed this up, friends. It's printed, it's out there, okay? So, it was a semi-finalist for the third prize for American humor. Thanks. If I had won that thing, can you imagine? It would have been a hot mess, right? The point is, fall down, get up, take your knocks because you are going to screw up, but don't fall into the trick of being fragile and being like, oh my God, somebody hurt my feelings. No, you gotta get up and you gotta try again. Ask the hard questions and examine yourself, right? That's where this all really comes in, and that's how we're gonna make it right, is by making sure we ask the hard questions.
I want to pick up because there's a battle going on right this minute for the African Studies Association. And here's the dilemma. The African Studies Journal published an article by two white women who did exactly what Ellen did. They went to Africa, they married African men, and they wrote about that experience like Ellen did, published an article in the African Studies Journal. 7 black scholars wrote in and demanded that the article be taken out. She said, because this is cultural tourism. And she said, this is they've got a word for now, autoethnography, which is putting yourself into the middle of the ethnographic thing, as Ellen did. They would probably use that criticism against Inlandia and you, Ellen. And I love it, but Ellen's writing. I'm hoping Inlandia sticks to its guns on this one. But realize that this debate has gotten so tense that you've got this tension. Some say you must not cross that boundary and start writing, even if you write it from your own perspective. So this is really a tension. Right? This is a tension battle going on right this minute.
Ellen, so how would you respond to that?
Yes. Well, this whole being on this panel has made me think about what it means to be Iranian and American, and when one is a citizen for 52 years, but one is not really Iranian. So, in this country we have this narrative, however true it is, that, it's a melting pot here. People come and they assimilate. And, or maybe it's a fruit salad, or, we're not clear what it is. And the degree to which people assimilate and the speed with which they do it has all kinds of factors, socioeconomic and racial and everything else. But we have this narrative. Iran has no such narrative. Nobody really expects you to, the passport you have, the Iranian passport, is a convenience. You're there because your husband's there. There was no great wave of immigration to Iran, so they don't have that experience. They don't have that narrative going on. So when I came back to the States after the revolution in 1980, and people were demonstrating in Washington, D.C., at the Iranian consulate against Iran. And I was downtown with my kids and my sister and her kids, and I said to my sister, I wonder if anybody knows we're Iranian. And she said, listen to yourself. Like, you're not Iranian, right? But I am, but I'm not. So this is something that I'm dealing with, and I said it's kind of enjoyable to deal with it. And I firmly believe that we all occupy several different communities. We're never just one thing. And that's what makes our lives enriched, right? It can be very, very painful sometimes, but that's the way it is for me anyway. I feel a kinship with Iranians, and I feel very American in my distaste for the Islamic Republic, but so do many Iranians. So I don't know. I think I'm not writing in the ethnographic presence about Iran. So there's that for me. And I am writing with some credentials. I'm not just, as I said, passing through. So I'm not too worried. But I'm sure, Carlos, once you publish something and it's out there, you've lost control. Any nutcase can come and say,
So you shouldn't say, you knock me out, you get back up. You don't
Well, it's a question of who gets hurt, right? It's a question of whose personality or whose identity is at stake, right? And that's kind of a critical thing. But I think one thing we haven't addressed here is the idea of framing, right? Once you do put it out in the world, or once you find a publisher for it, there is the question of how you frame it, right? If you frame it as I am Iranian, right? Then you're going to get some blowback, right? But if you frame it as I live in this culture, I immerse myself in it, I have a great respect for it, right? But I'm also American.
Yeah.
Then that's a different story, right? It's a matter of how you and your publisher, in my opinion, manage to put that forward, right? So I think that's a really good thing to look at and think about.
Sure.
Well, there are clearly there's a lot more ground to cover in this. Perhaps we should consider doing part 2. And a lot of issues that we can discuss in this round. Thank you all so much for coming and for being an engaged audience. We appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time to come and discuss these difficult issues with us. So I just want to first apologize for being AWOL during the beginning of this. We had a minor parking lot minor emergency, but it got handled. So thank you for all being so professional and just moving on with the show. I want to thank Minerva for doing a wonderful job of moderating this panel. Thank you to our panelists. This has been a very enlightening discussion. It is live streaming on YouTube as we speak, so it will be saved for posterity. And we had a lot of interested parties who couldn't be here in person, but who have been watching. So, speaking as publisher and thinking about all of these issues, this actually is a very heartening conversation for me. We've done a lot of reflection in publishing these books. We take the decision to publish a book very seriously. When we published a book that had queer characters by a non-queer author, we made sure that it was read by somebody from that community and got their blessing, and in fact they blurbed it at the end, which was not part of the process initially. But these are things that we will address, and I really like that idea of respectful curiosity. And one of the things that I've emphasized when I have workshops is, whose story is it that you're telling? If it's your story, then I feel like then you can tell it from your perspective. And like all the panelists have made it very clear, don't try and step into somebody else's shoes. I think that's where a lot of the boundaries get crossed. So I also want to take a minute, because all of these events from the beginning of time for Inlandia here at Arts Walk have been supported by the Friends of the Riverside Public Library. We are here in the beautiful community room of the new downtown Main Public Library, and we have with us tonight the Friends of the Public Library. And so I want to personally thank you for being here and thank the Friends for more than a dozen years of support. And if you aren't already a member, please pick up a brochure. It's $20 for a year. So you can't beat that. And it supports programs like our program tonight. I also want to encourage you, we have books by Carlos at the back, and our authors who are here who did not bring books, and also who have books forthcoming, please look for them, follow them on social media, support our authors. And lastly, we have another event this week on Sunday at the Culver Center, UCR Arts on Main Street. Please join us, 1:30 p.m. for a conversation with another of our authors, Nikia Cheney, who wrote the stunning memoir, Ladybug. And she will be in conversation with Lizbeth Koyman, and it will detail mental health struggles within the African American community and growing up here in the IE. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you again in just a few weeks. Thank you. Thank you.